I'm going to show you how to use REST and Orchestrator. Let's get started. Hi everyone, I'm Watrous from VVork. If this is your first time here and you want to learn about automating, programming, and monitoring in VMware environments, you're in the right place. This is part 10 in a 10-part video series in which we're exploring how to make REST API calls. Here in part 10, we're going to be looking specifically at Orchestrator. In the previous two videos, we saw how to add a REST host and how to add a REST operation. Those are the first two steps that we need to perform. Now comes the moment when we're going to invoke the REST operation. To do so, we're going to go out of the configuration folder. So we're done for the time being with the configuration workflows. And what we're going to do is go run a REST operation. Let's select run REST operation. We'll click run. And the very first thing it wants to know is what REST operation do we want to call? Now you'll notice that once again we're in the tree browser looking at the inventory being managed by the REST plugin. And if we expand, at the first level we can see the REST servers that we've added using the workflow called add a REST host. And then if we open up one of those servers, we can see all of the REST operations that we've added. And as you can see, I've added just a single REST operation here. Let's select that REST operation. We'll click select. And then optionally, we can specify things such as application/JSON. This particular server, if I recall correctly, only accepts JSON. It only returns JSON, so we don't really need to specify this. But if you need to specify what format you want the data to come back in for a REST server that supports multiple formats, this is where you do that. All right, as you can see, this workflow is quite simple. We'll just run it. And as you can see, it's running. And it's now complete. Now, again, you don't see on the screen any jokes, so let's go hunting around and see where those jokes are. Well, one place we might see those jokes is if we go to the Logs tab. Depending upon what exactly we're doing here, we may see different information in the logs, including we've gotten back, well, actually, this is a video series on REST. You should know why I'm looking for this code here. So we got a 200, that's good. And then the content that we've received in response is this joke here. Now there's other information that's been logged here, and that may be useful, but this is the key piece of info that we came here to find. There's the one joke that we're looking for. Now the logs are where you could go to just visually see the response, but what if you want to actually work with that response? Well, the short answer to that is you need to go work with the variables that the REST plugin sets up for us here. Now some of these variables, such as error code, are just fairly standard variables that we use. So error code is used in this particular workflow if there is an exception thrown by this schema element and we end up going here, the error message that's thrown by the exception will be thrown through that variable called error code. But error code, that's just a generic sort of thing. This here is a much more REST-specific thing. So the variable called status code as attribute, which in this case returned a value of 200, is the status code from the response. So we got a 200, not a 400 series or a 500 series. We got a 200 series, and we all know that that's good. We're going to see later on in this video series how to pass parameters to the REST operation that we're calling, which is what these parameters are about. And additionally, if we continue scrolling on, you can also see that we have header parameters, but those will come later. For right now, I'd like to point out that REST operation is the variable in which we're storing what REST operation you requested. So you'll notice if we expand this here, we can see that we're getting the URL is going to end in /random_joke and so forth. So we've got information about the REST operation, but if we scroll downwards, as you can see here, we have content and another variable called content as string. Now, when I first started working with the REST plugin, I was confused about the distinction between those. Content, the one that we see up here, is the request content. If your REST operation needs to send in body, here is where you specify that content. This particular operation didn't require that, so we left it blank. the response body is in this variable here called content as string, which you can actually see here in the value column. That's the actual response that we got back. Again, we've got status code, we've got the content length, and if we were receiving headers, we would receive them here. So as you can see, we've got the variable here called content as string that we can use elsewhere. If we were creating a workflow, we could use this information elsewhere. Now we'll see how to do that in the next video. In the next video, we're going to create a brand new workflow from scratch, and we'll call our REST operation, and we'll grab a hold of this content as string variable, and we'll parse it. Because we don't want the type, we don't want the ID, we just want the setup and the punchline. So in the next video, we'll learn how to create a workflow and how to parse this information. But to close this video, I'd like to briefly introduce you to this other workflow called generate a new workflow from a REST operation. Now the point of this particular workflow, as its name suggests, is to automatically create a new workflow that will call whatever REST operation we specify. So let's actually run this real quickly here. We'll click run. All right, as you can see here, the first thing that we need to do is specify what REST operation we want to call. So let's select here, we'll browse the tree, and we'll find the REST operation that we want our newly automatically generated workflow to call. The Workflows Property tab tells us this is what we're going to call the newly generated workflow. If you would like to change the name to something else, to something like my workflow that invokes this REST operation, you can change the name, and you can specify where you want your newly generated workflow to be stored. In other words, which workflow folder. So let's do that. We'll click folder. And in here, it's not a tree browser this time. Instead, this time we're supposed to type the name of the folder. I believe I have a folder called my workflow folder. There are other workflow folders such as the library workflow. You should probably not put your stuff there. The library workflow is where the plugins put their workflows. There is another workflow that you should know about called webroot. This is in effect the default folder where people put their workflows. But since I've already created my own workflow folder, I'm going to choose that. We'll go ahead and click run. And it's not actually running the REST operation. What it's done, what it's just completed, is to create a new workflow. If we hit close and we go over to my workflow folder, as you can see, I have a workflow here called my workflow that invokes get one joke. If we select that workflow, as you can see, it already has a workflow schema designed to call the the REST operation that we just specified. And if necessary, the user who is calling our newly automatically generated workflow can pass in inputs to describe exactly how they want it to work. So this is a functional workflow. You can actually run it, but the idea here is essentially that we've created a workflow that you can use as the starting point to create your larger workflow. Now again, join me in the next video because we are going to talk about how to create a workflow from scratch that calls a REST operation. Join me in the next video as we continue our exploration into REST and Orchestrator.